Okay, which premise do you disagree with?
The first one, to begin with, we said the first one.
Okay, so give me another option. Give me, if you're saying it's false dichotomy, what's your other option?
Humans are half marshmallow. You can be half marshmallow, half
and person. Give me an option you agree with, because I'm not trying to cover every single possible.
But that's the problem, is that
marshmallows are physical. Marshmallows are physical.
Immaterial.
So nope.
You got me. Immaterial marshmallow.
That's a contradiction in terms.
It's not.
Yeah, marshmallows are by definition physical.
It's an immaterial marshmallow.
It don't matter.
You see,
that's a contradiction in terms.
It's really not. What I'm showing is that I can just make up anything and then just say that humans are
sure. And I can call you out on that when there's a contradiction in terms, which is what I'm doing.
And that's what I'm doing. And I'm waiting.
Where have you called me out? Show me where you called me out, please.
All right. So it's 8 o'clock on the dot. So that I can respect you all's time, I guess we'll go ahead and get going. As we talked about, this discussion is really informal. Just to kind of give my history with both of you, Will and I have been talking since Will. I don't know if you realized it, but last month was our 12-month.
Has it been a year?
Yeah, it has been.
That's a quick year. Must be COVID.
We started talking in February of 2021, and I reached out to him and said, "Hey, let's talk." I think, Will, that you may have said something along the lines of, "I'm an atheist, but I enjoy your show."
Probably.
And so I think that I just reached out to you to be like, "Hey, I would like to learn more about what you believe." And so I think in you got on Telegram and we started talking. And so, yeah, Will and I have discussed quite a bit concerning theology and things like that. And then as for Eric, I don't know how I found you on YouTube, Eric, but I did. And I've loved your content. I've Apologist content. I've seen you on, and I've seen several of your debates. And so I know that you specialize or that your interest is in arguing for the existence of the soul. That's a topic that Will and I have also covered as well. But my knowledge of the philosophical ways to show that is very, very small. So I thought that Will might enjoy hearing from a Christian who knows immensely more about it than I do. And Eric, given that I know that you engage atheists often on this topic, I thought that you might be interested in speaking with Will about it. So I'm grateful and excited that you guys have accepted the invitation to have just a very formal discussion. I mean, after I say this, this discussion can go kind of however we want. I know, Eric, you had asked a question through email, trying to get a gauge on Will's position. And so I don't think that Will had responded. So if you guys wanted,
did I miss a question?
There. Yeah.
Did I miss a question? I thought that I had answered. I didn't know if you followed up after we had that brief back and forth that one day.
Yeah. You mentioned a few things. I mean, we didn't nail down a position, but I mean, enough for me to at least in the back of my mind kind of have an idea where you're coming from.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, I grew up in the church, so I'm familiar with the words and ideas and such. But what I came to understand when I left was that oftentimes we were using words that had never actually been defined and concepts that hadn't been shown to exist. And then when I would ask Christians, and I didn't know what they were like, if I wanted to define it, I realized that I was unable to define words like the soul. And when I ask Christians, what is the soul, or in even other items, I'll get a bunch of things. And I have a lot of these conversations with my mother, but there's other people also. But it would be like, well, it's not this, it's not that, it's not this, but I never get it is this or some sort of description of it. So I guess that's a great starting point to I guess, ramp up into a discussion about the soul.
Yeah, no, and I'm sorry to hear that. I get the same thing, and I'm a Christian, still in Christian circles. So that's kind of one of the things I try to do is explain and help educate people on that, because you're absolutely right. A lot of Christians don't know what these things are. Unfortunately, they don't take their theology seriously, or not even as serious as some atheists take theology, which is sounds counterintuitive, but it's definitely the case. So yeah, and what should I call you, Mr. Jackson? What do you prefer, by the way? Because this is our first time meeting.
Mr. Jackson, if you're nasty.
You can just call me Adonis. Adonis is
all right.
fine. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, like Adonis was saying, very informal. So, so I guess you want to start with the definition. The soul can be defined as an immaterial substance that is the possessor of consciousness and is the thing that animates the body.
Immaterial substance. Is that contradictory already? Immaterial and substance?
No, before, and if you don't mind me asking to kind of get, before I answer the question, and I just want to say off the bat, appreciate having this discussion, and definitely want to be respectful. I don't have any doubt you'll be respectful, and of course I want to try to do the same. But in the spirit of kind of getting to know where you're coming from, I noticed you mentioned, because the question's a bit telling that you asked, but I do get that question often. You mentioned that you're familiar with some of these terms, but people could not define them for you. Have you looked at any literature or any scholarship that has been done in this area of the philosophy of mind?
No, I can't say that I've looked it up. I mean, I've seen people discuss it, but I've been left still wondering what the definition is.
And when you say people discuss it, do you mean like your average,
yeah, YouTube apologists, yeah, pretty much, whatever's on the internet, but not actually, I haven't looked into any books or anything.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I would certainly encourage that. And I can point you in those directions. And the reason I ask, because it's because I too, I mean, if I'm talking to, no offense to the average grandmother Baptist lady at the church, she probably wouldn't be able to give you a definition of the soul, much less maybe even something as simple as a definition of something like theology. But I say that to say, because your question, if that's a contradiction, the answer is no. The first person to use the word substance was Aristotle, and he was doing philosophy. And basically, a substance was a thing that stood under and possessed and unified a thing's properties. And when he started talking about substance, one of the first ways he was using it was an immaterial substance. So the word substance was first used in philosophy and by Aristotle. And one of the ways to use it was as an immaterial substance. It was later on that science borrowed these philosophical terms, which is kind of what science does, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, when people first started doing science, they called it philosophy of nature, because you were doing metaphysics essentially. So no, a substance, there's a whole bunch of literature on what a substance is, and we can kind of go into that. But to answer the question you just asked, no, immaterial substance is not a contradiction. It's a thing that stands under the properties and unifies and possesses whatever we're talking about.
All right. Well, I just Googled it, just the definition of substance, and the two usages that I got, there's probably more, were a particular kind of matter with uniform properties, and the real physical matter of which a person or thing consists, and which has tangible, solid presence.
Yeah, so it's going to depend where you're looking this up. Let me see. Let me look it up myself. So the definition, I'm assuming if you just use Google, it looks like it's talking here about chemistry. So it's going to depend on where you're going to be looking it up at. If you look up the etymology of substance and where it came from, because doing a quick Google search, you're obviously not going to see the etymology. You don't see Aristotle mentioned. So it's obviously using it in a certain context there. But like I said, going to what a substance is and where it was first used, it was definitely Aristotle. If you expand that, if you go, because I just Googled it myself. If you expand that, there's like a see more button. There's a fourth definition at the bottom. It says philosophy, the essential nature underlying phenomenon, which is subject to changes and accidents. So that's just how it was first originally used. And each one of these are going to be in a certain context or field that it's being used. So words can mean different things in different fields. And to know what a word means, you obviously want to look at where it came from and how it was first used. And that'll give you a good basis idea what it means.
All right, that's fine as long as we have a definition and it doesn't move around. So as long as we're agreeing that in this case, substance doesn't necessarily mean physical.
Right. And that's the definition. So what I hold to view known as substance dualism. So even then, right off the bat, I mean, it's something known in the literature and philosophy of mind. This is what scholars would use, be it atheist, agnostic, Christian or not. Philosophers using this, and substance dualism is a position known within the philosophy of mind. So dualism means, you can just say it means twoism. So on a substance dualist view, and there's various kinds, you're talking about two things in existence. When we're talking about the nature of a human person, my position is that I am a soul. I have a body, but I am a soul. So my soul is the immaterial substance. And then there's another part of me, if you will, that we would call the body, that's made of something physical. So yeah, it's something that is well understood within the field of philosophy of mind.
All right. So what we were doing, and then I agree. I think everyone does have the physical portion. We all have bodies. I think we can agree on that. So I think we were trying to establish the immaterial part. So I'll let you go forward with that.
Sure. Now I did a debate not too long ago, and I did like a 10 or 15 minute opening with some slides. I can go through that if you want. And I don't have to go. I can go through that. You can stop me at any point if you'd like, or we can just whatever you think would be best.
Yeah, whichever's the best way that you know how to do it. Works for me.
Yeah, let me just do that, and that'll be a good starting point. And like I said, this is just something I used last time I had a discussion on this. So let me go up here, and feel free to stop me anytime. So I start here with the definition, like we were just talking about. That where'd it go? Okay. So two basic points I use whenever I give a talk or discussion or debate on the soul is the first point that I use to establish a case for the soul is that consciousness is not physical. The second would be that I am more than a brain and body, or we can say I am neither identical nor reducible to my body. I'm a soul. Definition of a soul being an immaterial substance that possesses consciousness along with its states and properties and animates the body. So the soul is a self, like I mentioned earlier, the conscious subject. So I am a soul, on my view. To unpack these, there's something in philosophy known as the longer word is Leibniz's law of the indiscernibility of identicals, but for short, I just call it the law of identity or Leibniz's law. And like I said, feel free to stop me anytime. Especially if you're not familiar with some of this, I don't mind, unpacking it. And I don't mean that in any kind of patronizing way. Oh, no, I honestly want to, be able to explain this and make sure that you're following with me. So according to Leibniz's law, if two things in question are the same, say some A and B, then whatever is true of one is going to be true of the other and vice versa. But in principle, if I can find something true of one that's not true of the other or vice versa, then they can't be the same thing. So I've often used the example, say you walk into a lab and you see two bottles of clear fluid. If we're going to implement Leibniz's law, we can ask the question, are they the same substance? And the next thing we would do is look at their properties. We could say, well, they're both clear, they're both fluids. And you could say, well, so far, I think they're the same substance. But suppose one of them is labeled water, and on the other one, the label's been ripped off. And when you turn it around, it says caution flammable. And you think, well, I know water's not flammable. So given Leibniz's law, since they don't share the same properties, it can't be the same thing. Now, I would say that given this, if there's no soul, then the mind, and if everything's physical, the mind would have to be something identical or reducible to something physical like the brain. And again, given Leibniz's law of identity, they would have to share the same properties. Now, this would be a view known as physicalism, which would be the view that human beings are purely physical objects. And I'm simplifying for the sake of time. So again, this would mean that whatever's true of one is going to have to be true of the other. But if we can find something true of one that's not true of the other, then by the same principle, they can't be the same thing. So to establish my first point, and that would mean that physicalism can't be true. So to establish my first point, we can just take a state of the mind and take a state of the brain. A state of my mind would be something like my thoughts or beliefs. My thoughts or beliefs can be true or false. And we know that when there are thoughts, there's a correlated group of neurons firing in your brain. My thoughts and beliefs can be true or false, but no region or neurons firing in my brain are true or false. It doesn't make sense to say that my neurons fire true or false. My brain can weigh 3 pounds, but my thoughts don't weigh 3 pounds. My brain can be 7 inches long, but the smell of a rose or the taste of a banana is not 7 inches long. And again, just to try and be brief, if all the properties of the brain are physical and all the properties of the mind are immaterial and not identical or reducible to something physical, then it follows that the mind and brain can't be the same thing. In our email discussion, you briefly said that you don't think the mind is the brain. Depending on where you go with that, which I would agree, and depending on where you would go with that, that could lead to a type of dualism. There are some philosophers who think that the mind is immaterial. They would say that these are immaterial properties. They wouldn't maybe necessarily go as far as to say there's a soul. That would bring you into what I hold to, substance dualism. But they would at least say, and again, this is not just Christian philosophers, atheist, agnostic philosophers saying it's pretty clear that the mind is immaterial and not identical or reducible to the brain.
Just
now, when
of
course,
so
please.
I think what I would say is that the mind it's not necessarily a thing. It's more like a concept. So we call whatever the brain does the mind. What like you said, you described it as your thoughts and opinions and whatnot that comes from your mind, and that's just a word we call to conceptualize what the brain does, but they're not the same thing. But I don't think that severs the two.
I'm not sure what you mean by severs. Depends what you mean by severs, but let me ask you this: so it's not, so you just said that they're not the same thing, is that right?
Right, because what we use as the mind is a concept, it's an idea.
Okay, but in order to have concepts, you would need a mind. So how can a concept have a concept?
No, the concept itself, or the mind itself is a concept, it's an idea. It's not like you said, it's not a physical thing, but it's just a word we use to describe what the brain does.
Well, okay, so
if you don't have a brain, you also don't have a mind. In other words,
how do you know that?
You can take someone's brain out and see if they can do things.
But okay, well, let me ask you this: how do you even know that someone has a mind to begin with?
Because it's simply what we call it by definition. They do.
I'm not sure what you mean, but let me go back to what you originally said. You said the mind is just a concept. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, but so there are 5 states of consciousness. You have thoughts, beliefs, sensations, desires, and volition. And when you have thoughts and you have beliefs and you have sensations, something has to own and possess that. And let's say these things are contained, if you will, for lack of a better word, in your mind. But if the mind is just a concept, then how does a concept have a concept? Because obviously I can have concepts of things, but that's because those are grounded in my mind is a thing that is possessing or thinking these things. But if the mind is just a concept, then it sounds counterintuitive to say that concepts can have concepts.
Incorrect. Your brain is thinking the things. The things are your mind.
Okay, so you're saying the mind is inside the brain.
It's a emergent property. The brain is the brain, and the mind is what the brain does. Your lungs are your lungs, but your lungs breathe. But your breath is not your lungs. Okay,
so interesting. So you talked about an emergent property. Let me ask you this: how do we detect a mind to begin with? Because you briefly touched on that, but I wasn't clear on what you mean.
Sure. The mind is when you have a brain that's functioning. That's the mind. If it's not functioning, I would say you don't have a mind. So if you're a vegetable, you no longer have a mind. But that's due to damage to the brain.
So, but that sounds circular to me.
Well, go ahead.
Well, so let's say you see a brain, and how do you know if a brain's functioning?
People are able to move, speak. express ideas,
But
problem solve.
can't robots do that? Can't robots move and seem to express ideas? In other words, it seems you're presupposing that there are ideas and that there's a mind there. But my question is, how would you know that there's a mind in the first place? How do we detect that? Because I know how we can detect brains. I know how we can look at neurons firing. But to say neurons firing, therefore we know there's a mind, I don't see how you jump to that. If all you see are neurons firing in the brain, how do you conclude therefore there's a mind?
By the neurons firing, by you doing things, by you saying things, by you putting sentences together, by you breathing.
Which I'm going to say seems. I'm going to say it seems question begging, because if all you can observe are neurons firing, then you just kind of assume. Why would you assume there's a mind there?
That's what we call the mind. By definition, that is the mind.
Whose definition?
Humans.
Not a definition I've heard of.
It just is. I don't know. Like that's almost a brute fact. And the way that you know that is if you shut off the brain, all the other things stop also. There's no thoughts. The things that you are considering a mind all stops when you shut off the brain.
But so I'm trying to think how to get at this, and I might go back to my slides because my next point touches kind of what you're getting at. But we can detect a brain, but so far I haven't heard a way how we detect the mind. Because when I ask you how we detect the mind, you point to neurons firing, but that's how we detect brains, not minds. You just assume there's a mind behind these neurons firing.
No, that's what we call it by definition. That's the mind. The mind is what the brain does.
I've never heard that definition. The definition I've heard for consciousness would be giving the 5 states of consciousness. While you're looking it up, if you don't mind, I want to get back to the slides and I want to see what you think of this here. Okay, cool. Okay, because what I often get, first thing I want to say is because I often get, and you alluded to this in the email, is that if you affect parts of my brain, you can affect parts of my mind, which I agree with, but that doesn't show that it's identical nor reducible to something like the brain, or I can say cause or dependence is not the same thing as identity. Suppose I'm the world's greatest guitar player. Suppose I'm the world's greatest guitar player and I pump some strings and wait, can you see my slides? Probably not. I forgot to share the screen.
No, it's not showing.
My fault. Okay. Sorry about that. Let me do this again. Okay. So, so suppose I'm the world's greatest guitar player and let's say I pump a string and I can't play the music. We have established as a cause and effect relationship between me playing the music and my instrument. Or suppose you detune my guitar or pop a few other strings and I can no longer play the note C. It wouldn't follow that these are the same thing or that one's inside of the other. So at best, all you could do is show that there's a correlation, but just because you affect one doesn't mean that there's not something else that does exist. So depending on how you define mind, which I'm still not clear of, you're just saying it's what the brain does, but how do you even, when we look at cause and effects, I can see how fire causes smoke. How would you see that neurons firing causes anything mental? How would you even know there's something mental there? For all we know, in philosophy, there's something called the philosophical zombies. For all we know, everybody else could be a, quote, zombie that just looks and acts just like us, but wouldn't necessarily have any mental experiences. We can make a robot that passes a Turing test, and how would you know whether or not that robot had any mental states? So I'm still unclear how you would identify that something has a mind, because it's just question begging. If you say, well, there's neurons firing and look, it does this and it does that, we can get robots to do that. So just because there's cause and effect relationships doesn't prove they're the same thing, it's identical, or that it's just what the brain does, which I'd still like to hear you unpack that. In other words, it doesn't show they're the same thing or reducible to the other. So sure, you can do things to my brain and it'll affect my mental states, but it doesn't prove they're the same thing or reducible to the other. It doesn't prove that the mind is identical or reducible to the brain. I'll stop there and I'll let you just respond or share your thoughts on that. Sure.
In your opinion, then what is the brain? What does it do?
It is a basically an electrolyzed piece of meat. If I were going to stick with the analogy, it would be my instrument, my guitar, if you will.
Could you play music without the guitar? If the guitar was the instrument that you had?
So here's probably where the analogy would break down. Without an instrument, no, unless, I go to a piano or something. But it sounds like you may be alluding to whether or not there can be a disembodied existence. Now, I do think there is. I haven't given an argument for that, but I do think there can be disembodied existence.
And I did actually find mind the element of a person that enables them to be aware of the world, their experiences, to think, to feel, faculty of consciousness and thought. Can we do those things without the brain?
I think so, but that would go deeper than what I'm arguing here, but I don't mind discussing that if you'd like.
Have you heard of any examples of people doing that without the brain?
I have.
You'll have to send me a link.
Yeah, I could recommend you quite a few books. There's one called The Science of Near-Death Experiences. There's another written by, I forgot what medical journal. There's been a lot of research done on what's called NDEs. But even aside from that, if Christianity is true and God exists, then you have at the central core of this religion an unembodied mind, namely God.
Do you plan on touching on NDEs?
I can if you like.
Well, if you planned on it, then I would leave it alone until you brought it up. But if not, then I would offer my opinion on NDEs.
Yeah, well, we can let's set it aside for right now, and we can come back to it. So at this point, all I'm saying is that consciousness is not identical and reducible to the brain. Now, if you're going to say that the mind is what the brain does, then you're essentially going to say that, or you're going to have to say that consciousness is some type of a function of the brain. Would that be accurate? Okay.
Yes.
Now, I would just apply the same argument I've already used. If consciousness is just a function of the brain, well, functions can't be true or false, but my mental states can be true or false. So that alone would show that consciousness can't merely be a function of the brain.
I wouldn't say your mental states would, but your ideas can be. And that doesn't preclude the brain from being what created the incorrect thought.
Well, I don't even know how you would show that the brain produces the mind, because you would have to have some way to detect it to show that. I don't even think you can, because I don't think it's physical. But if you're going to if the mind is a function of the brain, I'll just reiterate, then a thought would be a function of the brain. But yes. Functions can't be true or false. Thoughts can be true or false. Therefore, thoughts can't merely be functions. It's something different than a function. It may be correlated, may be caused or dependent on, but that's not to say they're the same thing.
I don't see the I guess you're making a distinction where I don't see a distinction. A thought can be incorrect. If you think 2 + 2 is 5, that thought came from your brain, and it is also incorrect.
So even if you're going to say that the mind is caused by the brain, which I would push back on that, but just for the sake of argument, my point is it cannot merely be a function of the brain. It could be a result of something functioning within the brain, like neurons firing, but the thing itself is not going to be identical or reducible to some function.
How did you come to that conclusion?
Leibniz's law of identity. So my engine running in my car is a function, but an engine running is not true or false. Digestion is not true or false. So functions cannot be true or false. Thoughts can be true or false. Therefore, they can't be the same thing. Even if you say the function causes a thought, I'd be fine with that. But you're still going to have to explain what that thought is, given that it's not reducible or identical to a function, even if you're going to say it's caused or correlated with the function, which again, I'd be fine with saying that as well.
No, again, I would reiterate that a thought, I think, in you previously, you had asked what was the question? The problem of the mind, I think is how you phrased it, correct?
So in philosophy, it's called the hard problem of consciousness.
Hard problem of consciousness. And my response was, I don't think that there's a problem there. And what I've seen people do is they try to say that there's a problem with determining what a thought is or whatnot. And I guess I don't see the problem there if you accept that thoughts come from the brain. And the way that you show that, again, is if I damage your brain in certain ways or certain areas or totally completely, you no longer have thoughts. And I don't think just saying I don't accept that overturns the actual evidence of the damaged brain stopping thoughts from happening.
So I never said I don't accept that. In fact, I said I'd agree with that. My only point is they're not the same thing. And the hard problem of consciousness, if you don't think there's a problem, then you're disagreeing with the majority of atheist thinkers, agnostic philosophers who've spent their life almost studying the subject. But what the hard problem of consciousness is essentially, where does consciousness come from? How does it arise? Again, even if you're going to say it's caused by it, that doesn't solve the problem of consciousness. That showing a correlation is not an explanation of consciousness, nor is it an explanation of where consciousness comes from. At best, that's all you have is a correlation, and calling it emergent is just slapping a label on the problem. And even then, I have this written down, we can go to it if you'd like. I don't think that the mind can emerge on the brain. Even if it does, you get into what's called epiphenomenalism, which would basically entail that your mental states, like your thoughts and beliefs, don't actually cause anything. And it would do away with something like free will. And I don't know your position on free will, but even if I were to grant that metaphysically speaking, the mind can emerge from the brain, it goes into other problems, but I'm not granting either. I'll just, wherever you want to go with that, I'm more than happy to.
No, I mean, I understand not knowing how a thought arrives in the brain. I just don't consider that a problem. Like, because you can't pinpoint a spot in the brain and say, there's a thought right there, doesn't mean that it doesn't come from the brain when you can show that no thoughts come with no brains.
So
I think that to me, the problem is going to be showing that people can have thoughts without brains when it hasn't been shown.
So I haven't argued that at all. If you remember, my 2 points is the first is just that consciousness is not physical. And the second point is that I'm more than a brain and body, I'm a soul. I haven't argued that thoughts don't come from the brain. I'm fine with saying that, except I would say they're caused by brain states. Neither have I argued that you can have thoughts without a brain. Those are two separate questions that don't prove or disprove whether or not the soul exists.
I agree. And so we should leave the brain, I guess, all completely out of it, because and thoughts, because I think thoughts and brains have been connected, and there's nothing to show that they're not. So I guess,
but that's not an argument for or against the soul, nor is it an argument that I've.
No, but you were saying we got on the brain and thoughts and whatnot in your attempt to show that the soul exists. So I guess we have to divorce those things from the soul and try to get that the soul exists.
No, not at all. Because so my first point is that consciousness is not physical. From there, let me go back to my slides here, and you tell me when to stop, because I just want to touch on another point here. So, where was I at? Okay, so this is Thomas Nagel. He's was rated one of the top 50 living atheist philosophers or philosophers in the world. He has an entire book called Mind and Cosmos: Why the Materialist Neo-Darwinian Conception of Nature is Almost Certainly False. One of the central theses of his book is that you cannot get mind from matter. You can't just rearrange particles of matter and have mind squared into existence. That's essentially the hard problem of consciousness. How do you get consciousness to begin with? Where does it come from? Not just how can it be caused by my brain, but where did the first consciousness come from? Where they're such different things. Matter and mind are so incredibly different in their nature that it would almost be like rearranging the red bricks on a red house and expecting a rearrangement of red bricks to change the house to the color blue. It's just not going to happen. This is, gosh, I forgot his name. Colin McGinn, also an atheist philosopher, says a natural explanation for consciousness borders on sheer magic. He says how you kind of echoes what Nagel is saying. This is an agnostic philosopher leaning towards atheism. Jaegwon Kim wrote a whole book on philosophy of mind. He's an expert in this field. And he basically says that correlations are not explanations, but are in fact the very thing that need explaining. So here you have at least three of the top atheist scholars who have done work in this field, and they're basically all arguing about this hard problem of consciousness. And what Jaegwon Kim here is saying is that even if you call it an emergent property, that doesn't solve anything. You're just giving a label to it that doesn't explain anything about where it comes from. Now, if I were to go to my second point, the reason this is my second point is because, and I'll just stop here. When I use the word I am, it's what's called an indexical word. It refers to something. So just like the word here or there is a reference word, the word I refers to something. When I use the word I'm talking about me, the self, the conscious subject. Now, if consciousness exists and if it's not identical or reducible to the brain, and I would go further and say it's not even identical to a function, even if caused by a function, it is not the same thing as a function. It is something immaterial. Then it's going to be possessed by something, namely me, the I, the self. So I am conscious. And then the question becomes, what am I? So one of the reasons I would say that consciousness isn't going to be something that emerges from the brain, I won't go too terribly deep because I want to let you share your thoughts here, is because you're going to have something that possesses consciousness. And you could say it's the brain that possesses consciousness, but there's going to, your thoughts, beliefs, all these things are going to have to be grounded and possessed by something. So if you're conscious, you could say, I possess consciousness, but then the question becomes, what am I? And I'll just go ahead and share whatever you think, or if you want me to keep going.
The I portion of that, I don't necessarily understand the significance of it. Are you saying that in order to say I, you have to have a soul?
I'm saying that whenever you use the word I, the question then becomes, what is that referring to? Is it referring to a brain? Is it referring to a body? Or in my view, it's referring to me, the soul. What would your position be?
Do animals have souls?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I have come across people that didn't think animals had souls. And
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I recall looking it up. And you remember that, what was it? A gorilla, Coco, do sign language, was able to sign I am sad, I whatever. So I was able to show that problem right there. But I'm not seeing how consciousness is divorced from the brain at this point, because people hit their head and they fall unconscious due to damage to the brain.
Yeah. So all you're doing again is showing that if you do my guitar, you're going to affect my music.
And the music is the consciousness.
We can use that. Yeah.
And the guitar is the brain.
Yeah.
There you have it. You just agreed with me.
Well, that's a dualist position, though. That means there's at least two things in play here. So are you agreeing with me is really the question here. Are you agreeing that the mind is not something physical?
It's a concept. It's what the brain does. It's not a thing that you can grasp. It's something that we have a word for what the brain does. I don't think there's this disconnect between the two, like that you're.
I'm not saying there is, though. I'm just saying they're not the same thing. I'm just saying that the consciousness is not physical.
Yeah, I don't think people are saying that the mind is a physical thing. But
there's quite a few people saying that.
The brain is, and without
right,
and they're saying that without brains, there's no minds. And you're saying that there's minds.
That's a separate
brains.
question.
And,
well, I've said that in passing, but that's not part of my case, because if God exists, that's a mind without a brain. But
that's begging the question.
Well, no, so I'm not arguing for that. I'm just saying, in other words, I'm saying
that's not even what the discussion was about.
Right. Well, here's my point. My point is that it's not an unusual thought. So yeah, there are plenty of people saying that. And there are people saying that the mind is just the brain. It just depends what position you take. That's why in our email exchange, I was just curious to what position you would land on this. And granted, you've said, I don't want to be unfair here. You've said you haven't really looked into the literature, so that's fine. I mean, that's part of why we're having this discussion, to kind of hash out some of these thoughts and ideas. But at this point, because you keep going back to that, there's a correlation. Fire causes smoke. Doesn't mean they're the same thing. Playing notes on a piano or a guitar can cause music or notes to be heard. Doesn't mean they're the same thing. That's my only point so far, is that consciousness is not physical. You call conscious. You say that consciousness or the mind is a concept. I'm still not clear what that would even mean. I've already argued that it can't be a function, because there are things that there are properties of my mind that are not true of properties of functions, like being true or false. Functions are not true or false. So the mind can't be the same thing as a function. Now you can say it's caused by a function of the brain, but then I would have to ask you, what is the mind then? If you're going to say concept, the reason that doesn't work is because I can have concepts in my mind, but if the mind is just a concept, then it makes no sense to say that my mind, i.e. my concept, has a concept, because how can concepts have concepts? To have concepts, you would need a mind.
I think that's the example. That is the example. The brain has a mind. The emergent property of the brain is the mind, and the mind thinks of concepts, but the mind is not a physical thing. It's what we call what the brain does. So the mind's not physical. You're agreeing with me then? Right. And to be honest, when you say people say that the mind is the brain, I don't think that they're saying that it's physical. They're saying that there are no minds without brains, and thus it can be described as one and the same, but it's more that that's what the brain does. Now, so if you show me someone that says, nah, the mind is a physical brain, then I'd have to recant. But the way I understand that discussion is not that the mind and the brain are the same thing. It's just that one causes the other.
So yeah, I mean, I think Paul Churchland, who's an atheist philosopher, says that. Someone like Daniel Dennett, I believe, would lean in that direction. There's a number of philosophers who do say that the mind is a brain, because they're naturalists, they're materialists. They don't think anything immaterial can exist. So that's why I just said it just depends on what position you hold to. But if you're going to agree with me that the mind is not physical, well, then now we ask, what is it that possesses the mind? What is it possesses consciousness? If I'm not mistaken, you said the brain possesses consciousness. Is that your position?
It's a property of the brain. So let's use an analogy. Numbers are also concepts. Correct?
That's one view.
And I can conceptually have a problem with numbers that's also a concept. The problem itself that I make with numbers would be a concept.
Okay.
That's a concept in a concept. So your issue with the mind being a concept and also being able to conjure up concepts is not a problem. The same way numbers being a concept and then making a math problem with those numbers is also not a problem.
So that's not that wouldn't be analogous, because that's not a concept containing a concept. That's a concept about a concept, which is in your mind, not in the concept itself.
In that case, math is a concept.
Okay.
And then I can make conceptual problems with math, and that would be a concept and a
right.
Concept.
So, no, you're making a concept about a concept, but you just said I can make, right? So you're using the index word I. What is that I referring to? Are you a brain? Are you just a body? Are you a brain and body? Are you something just physical?
I'm my entire person. You don't have me without. It means you don't have me without the brain.
So what are you identical to? Are you identical to a brain?
Yes.
Okay.
If you remove my brain, you don't have me anymore.
Okay. So if you don't mind, I'd like to go into some of my other arguments from the second point, that I am more than a brain and body. Okay. Let me share before I forget. Okay. I don't know why it keeps going to that one there. Okay. So if I'm just a brain and body, or we can just say brain, since you're going with brain, then I would be what philosophers call a mereological aggregate, or we can just say aggregate for short, which is a collection of separable parts held together in a certain structure. So things like, cars, watches, Lego bricks are aggregates. They're just a collection of separable parts held together in a certain structure. Now, what we know about purely physical objects, because if you are identical or reducible to a brain, then you're just a purely physical object. The problem with that is that purely physical objects don't retain what's called in philosophy identity through change or part replacement. So, and let me just to kind of go step by step, because I don't want to just throw too much at you. If I replace the tires on a car, would you think it's the same car?
Sure.
Okay. Let's say I replace every piece of the car. Is it the same car?
I think I saw this on WandaVision.
Yeah, Ship of Theseus. Yeah, exactly. Which is an age-old philosophical thought experiment.
That's a good philosophical question. I don't know.
Okay. And then, well, here's one last question. Now, take all the replaced parts and put those back together. Now you have two cars. Now, we can ask the question, which is the original, if any? And regardless of your answer, I think we can all agree that they both cannot be the original. And what this shows us is that purely physical objects do not retain identity through change or part replacement. So here's how we would use this in an argument. Here's one of the one of the classic arguments, if you will, for the soul. It's right here. So I'll go to that one later. So first premise would be I'm either a purely physical object, an aggregate, or an immaterial soul. If I am a purely physical object, then I do not retain identity through change. I do maintain identity through change and part replacement. Therefore, I'm not a purely physical object. Therefore, I am a soul. So to kind of unpack this, we know that every 7 to 10 years, you replace virtually every cell in your body. Even your brain can lose cells. Now, if you're a purely physical object, then you're not going to retain identity through change because purely physical objects don't. But if you are the same person from one moment to the next, then you can't be a purely physical object. You have to be something more like a soul. Here's how Jaegwon Kim argued for this. This was the atheist philosopher I referred to earlier, agnostic leaning towards atheism. He said, in 2001, this brain and body did not exist, but I did exist in 2001. Therefore, I'm not identical or reducible to my brain and body. So that would be one of the first arguments I would use to show that I am not identical. When I use the word I'm not talking about a brain or body. I'm something more than that, namely a soul. So I guess the crux of it would be, do you think you maintain identity through change and part replacement?
As long as your brain's there, yeah.
Okay, so if you had surgery and part of your brain was removed, you would cease to exist?
You would be different. I mean, that's how lobotomy works.
Would you cease to? So are you saying you would still exist? Or are you saying you would cease to exist and some other person would come into existence?
I mean, that's actually happened where a whole new personality.
I didn't say personality.
Well, are you not your personality? Is your personality someone other than you?
No, it's no, it's not. It's not me. It's something I possess, but it can change and go. But I remain. It's the same person possessing different characters and traits. So when I was 5 years old, I was shorter than what I am now, but I was still me, Eric Hernandez. A new person didn't come into existence. I've been the same person throughout my life. There have been properties that have come and gone, what we would call in philosophy accidental properties that can change, but the core, my essence, who I am, my identity as myself didn't change. In other words, there wasn't one person didn't cease to exist and another person came into existence. When there's change, it presupposes something underlying the change. If you're going to say you're just a brain, then you're going to have to say that if there were, God forbid, something were to happen and they were to remove a part of your brain, you would have to say that you ceased to exist and some lookalike came into existence that wasn't you.
I think it would depend on what part of the brain and how that affects who you are. but I wouldn't say that that person ceases to exist. I would say that that person is different than they were, and that would be because their brain is also different than it was.
Okay, so now you're changing your position here, though. If you're going to say that the person's different, well, then now you can't say that you're just a brain, because once I start removing pieces, if you're the same person with just different personality, well, then there's something that's more to you than just a brain that grounds that identity and change through part replacement.
No, not if the cause of that is the brain. So
I don't think you're. I'm not sure if you're tracking here. If I can try a different example. If I have a tricycle, by definition, it's something with three wheels. If I remove one of the wheels, then metaphysically speaking, a tricycle has ceased to exist and a bicycle has come into existence. So, in a similar vein, if you're just a brain, then you're not going to be the same person throughout part replacement and change. And if you're going to say, well, no, they're the same person, then you're going to have to arbitrarily pick which part of the brain cannot be changed for you to remain you. And then you're going to have to say, I am not identical to the whole brain. I'm just identical to maybe these three regions of the brain, which sounds ad hoc and special pleading.
Not at all. I think the brain in its entirety creates who you. When you say I, you are referring. Look at it this way. Have you ever said I without a brain?
Not that I know of, but that's
right,
also.
Exactly.
But you're going back to a point that's irrelevant as to whether or not a soul exists.
It's extremely relevant to what you're saying.
Let me say this. Let's pretend I concede that. At best, and I'm not conceding that, but at best, all that would show is that I can't exist disembodied, but it wouldn't show there's no soul. All it shows is there's a correlation. It's like me saying, can you play the note C without an instrument? If you say no, it doesn't mean they're the same thing. It just means that there's a dependence relationship between the two, but it doesn't show that music doesn't exist or something like that. It's not showing there's no soul just because you're showing a correlation. Right. People have been thinking about these things for thousands of years, and it's not an epiphany to say, oh, because you have brain damage, you're going to affect my mind. Cavemen would have known that. So it's not, I get this objection a lot, and it's really bizarre to me because it's not some epiphany that, and I'm not saying you say this, I just get it so much. It's as if some atheists think they're the first ones to ever think of this in 2,000-3,000 years that, these things have been being discussed.
No, absolutely not. And I think the fact that you keep getting that objection should tell you that maybe there's an issue with how you're arguing it, because there's no way to separate you from the brain.
Okay, so I've not argued that. The reason I keep getting that is because I keep having discussions with people who just aren't familiar with the subject, and I don't mean to say that in any patronizing way. People who just aren't familiar with that make those kind of objections that are not objections. They think it is. I mean, it's like asking, where did God come from? Not that I want to go there, but that's such a bad objection. It's a category fallacy. So I'm not saying what you're saying is a category fallacy. I'm saying all that shows is that there's a correlation. There's, for example, and as you know, correlations are not, it doesn't necessarily, isn't an explanation. I can say that this is a true correlation, that when ice cream sales go up throughout the year, shark attacks go up. What's the correlation? Well, because it's summertime, right? So just because you show correlations doesn't prove anything one way or the other. All views regarding philosophy of mind, whether there's a soul or no soul or any type of dualism, are what's called empirically equivalent, meaning there's no amount of data that you can provide that I would disagree with that's going to weigh in favor of one view over the other necessarily. It's all going to be a philosophical conclusion that you come to based on the same data we're going to look at.
I guess that's probably where the issue is, because it's not a philosophical question. You're
of course it is.
Not at all. You're stating that there's this thing that
how is it not?
Because you're stating that there's this thing that exists in reality where brains are, and you're saying that it's somehow not subject to. Because when you're saying philosophical, it's kind of like we were looking at the definition of, what was it, substance earlier. And you said in philosophy, the definition of substance is this, but in these other fields, it's this. But the other fields is the field of reality, and philosophy is not its ideas.
You realize everything you just said was philosophy, right?
Yeah.
So that's called self-defeating in philosophy. If you're going to try to discount philosophy by using philosophy, then you just contradicted yourself.
I didn't say anything about philosophy other than it's not in the realm of reality. You can philosophize upon all sorts of concepts that aren't in reality, but that doesn't, like, I don't see how that's a defeater to what I said.
No, it's self-defeating what you said. If you're going to say philosophy doesn't get to reality, it sounds like what you were saying. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that there's certain philosophies that don't. But what
Sure.
what
does that matter? Theoretical physics can also be something that's not in reality.
Right, and until they show in theoretical physics, until they show it in reality, they don't accept it.
Well, no, not necessarily. No, because you have things like you have things like multiverses. People speculate before black holes were ever seen, which was only like in the past year or two. Yeah, just about every single scientist believed there were black holes.
Right.
So showing it is that's such a
until they showed
that
it.
Is
it wasn't accepted.
No. It was very much accepted.
It was
okay. Let's
it really wasn't.
Let's set this aside because basically we're getting at this. This is a philosophical question. It's not something that can be settled scientifically. In fact, science has very little to say about these metaphysical issues and questions. You cannot do anything without philosophy. Philosophy is going to be the foundation of everything in reality that we're going to discover, learn, and talk about. Science cannot exist without philosophy. So you cannot discount anything I'm saying by just saying, well, that's philosophy, which is not in reality. I don't even know what that means to begin with.
No, the point is you're trying to. So the reason why we're on brains and minds is because you're trying to build a case that says that somehow the brain is not connected to the mind. Somehow people become unconscious and it's a coincidence. Yet you did. You said it's a coincidence. You said it's a coincidence. You said it's a correlation between brain damage and being unconscious, but that you can't show that that's really why it happened. And that's just that's plain false. Eric, with all due respect, that's false. But what we're looking to do though is we're still looking for a soul. So
I want to push back on this because I think we're talking past each other a little bit. You said something interesting that basically we can't accept something until someone can show it. Is that right?
You said theoretical physics.
No, but is that your position that we shouldn't accept something until it can be shown?
For the most part. I mean, I wouldn't say anything is all the time or 100% or anything like that. But yeah, for the most part.
Give me an example, then maybe I misunderstand you.
An example of I shouldn't accept that a God exists until someone provides one.
Now, is that what you use for everything that you believe? You're not going to believe in something until it's shown to you?
For the most part, depends on how, I guess, important the thing is, how well justified it is.
Well, I guess that's what I'm asking. What would be an example of something you would believe without it being shown to you?
If you told me you had a pet dog, I'd agree. I'd accept it.
Okay, that's fair. Has anyone ever shown to you a mind?
No.
Yet you believe minds exist?
I believe they exist as emergent properties of the brain, yes.
Okay, and how did they show that to you? How did you see a mind emerging?
Well, here, look at it like this. Have you seen breath?
Yeah.
No,
you sound like a Christian though. You're gonna argue like a Christian. Don't do it.
You haven't
argue
seen water.
Don't use that wind thing. Bad Christians using bad apologetics use that kind of stuff.
No, I didn't say wind.
I said breath. Right, same principle. But yeah, I've seen breath.
No, wind and breath
are
two completely different things.
I've seen. Let's not argue semantics. I've seen breath. When it's cold outside, I can see my breath.
No, that's water. You're saying condensation. That's not breath.
I've seen. Okay, I think we're arguing semantics. But go ahead. So you're telling me I can believe in things I can't see?
Sure.
Interesting.
Can't see? Yeah, I don't see oxygen, but I know I breathe it in.
Okay. No, I mean that's so what do you mean then when you say until it's been shown to be true, or I forgot how you worded it, that
Yes,
you know,
a soul. So again, you're introducing something that's not evident, and trying to equate it with a mind, when
no,
a
I
mind
don't
is
think it's
simply
equated. I don't think it's equated. But and I've used one argument so far for soul, which was the identity change, which I'd actually like to get back to. So is your position still that you are a brain?
sure. Go ahead. We'll tentatively
Okay,
accept
then
that. Go ahead.
so then if there's a transplant or if some part of your brain's removed, then do you cease to exist? And is there someone else that comes into existence?
Depends on what happens with that brain.
Like what?
Does that person exhibit different personality traits?
Notice you said that person. That's already assuming that it's the same person. You're begging the question.
You're equivocating with words, and that's arguing like a Christian. Yes.
What word am I equivocating?
You're trying to use ambiguous words so that you don't get stuck with one.
These are metaphysical, technical words.
Equate words, but what we're talking about here, that body, the physical part of that body, what word?
Which word am I equivocating?
Things like person and you and I.
What is a person?
A person is...
person's a body. Yeah. Okay. Can I go to my next argument then? Because that would tie in wonderfully with this. Although I'm going to say, I would have to say, on your view, changing part of the brain, or even if there's a possibility of some type of a half hemisphere transplant, if you're going to say you're a brain, then you're going to have to say that you cease to exist and some other person comes into existence. Going on to my other argument. So why is it not working? Here we go. Okay. Indivisibility of personhood. Premise one's the same. I'm either a purely physical object, aggregate, or an immaterial soul.
That's a false dichotomy.
It's purely physical objects can be divided and come in percentages or degrees.
It's a false dichotomy.
I cannot. Okay, I'll let you push back on that. Okay, I'll let you push back on that.
It was before too, but I didn't mention it.
Okay. Do you want to just jump to it now?
I mean,
before I move on with the argument,
if you're building premises, then yeah, I think you'd have to address that.
Okay. Yeah. Let's go ahead. So why is it a false dichotomy?
Because you haven't exhausted everything that we could be.
Oh, right. No, absolutely. But you don't think there's a soul, right?
No.
Right. You're going to say that you're something physical, right? Like earlier you said you're a brain, and then a few minutes ago you said you're a body.
Right, because you're asking me to define complex creatures with, on the spot.
But, right, that's philosophy of mind.
And that's fine, but it's false dichotomy. So you had to, fix that.
So it depends on who I'm talking to. You could say it's a false dichotomy. Given that I'm talking with you, what other option would you be willing to accept? Because if you accept another option, by all means, it's a false dichotomy. But if you agree that you're going to be, in other words, if you're going to be a property dualist, which you're not purely physical, you could say there's physical properties and mental properties, but I am a physical substance, then that wouldn't necessarily be a false dichotomy, but you would still be a dualist. So I would have to change the wording a little bit. Well, that's why I asked you initially what your position was.
Well, look at it like this. You said I'm either a what you want to put the slide back up?
Yeah, a purely physical object or an immaterial substance.
Okay,
so
or an immaterial
substance. This is a structure in philosophy. I forget what it's called. The structure of the either or. I have to look it up. But go ahead.
So you want to put it back up though for a second?
Oh yeah, hold on. Let me.
Okay. Or an immaterial soul.
It's this one right here.
Well, you're attempting at this point to actually show that souls exist. So for you to put it in the premise is already incorrect. You can't do that.
No, because if So going back to my first point about consciousness not being physical, if consciousness is not physical, which you have conceded, as far as I understand it, then the next question is what possesses it. So if we're focusing just on what is the I, setting consciousness aside, then when you say I, is it something physical, immaterial, or both? What would your position be?
When I say I, I'm talking about the entire me. I'm talking about my body, my brain, my thoughts, my personality. Everything.
So I'll just have to reiterate:
everything that constitutes me?
Well, so that's what we're trying to discuss here. What is everything that constitutes you? Is it all physical?
It's my brain, my body, my personality. It's all that.
Is personality something physical?
No, it's how you behave. It's an attribute.
So it's not something physical.
No.
Okay, so then you are a type dualist.
So maybe this will help. Are you saying a soul is a personality?
I'm saying your soul is what possesses those immaterial things.
But exclusive of the brain?
No, not necessarily, but I'm saying that it's what possesses it. I fully agree that while I'm embodied, there's going to be a correlation between my soul and brain. I don't know of anyone that denies that.
So to you, the soul is somehow connected to the brain. How is it connected
I think
to the
so.
brain?
I'm not sure. There's various views on that.
How would something immaterial connect to something material?
Yeah, I also don't know.
So have you observed the soul?
Why would I observe something immaterial?
In order to...
I am a soul. I think every time I introspect and observe my mental states, I'm observing faculties of my soul.
So it seems to me that you're taking what the brain does, or at least parts of what the brain does, and calling that the soul.
Let me ask you. So I'm going to go back to this question. Have you ever observed a mind?
No, because it's what the brain does.
And going back to what the brain does, I don't know how else to explain it to say that doesn't work, because if you're going to say the mind is just a function, it's going to have to possess the properties that the mind possesses. My mind, which has certain states, can be true or false. A function cannot be true or false. Therefore, the mind cannot be merely something like a function. That's basic logic.
You keep saying that, but I'm not seeing. You're not showing where like you're treating the mind as though it's some sort of special thing. Not
it
sure
is.
Why. It isn't.
Because
it's what
virtually every philosopher across the board agrees it's something special. In fact, there's a word for it. It's called sui generis. It's something completely different than anything physical. Can you describe the mind in any physical terms?
It's what the brain does. Like that. It's that simple.
That doesn't describe. The brain. Okay.
It's really that simple.
Let me ask you this. The brain, what the brain does, neurons firing, synapses connecting. That's what the brain does. Is that consciousness?
It creates thoughts, is what the brain does.
That's not what I asked. Is that consciousness?
Not sure, but it regardless of what you ask, what the brain does is it creates thoughts.
Okay, no, what the brain, okay, you don't observe that. You do not observe that. That's one of my main points that I'm trying to get at. You do not observe the brain creating thoughts. How do you observe the brain creating thoughts?
Because I'm watching you speak. I know that your brain created those.
You don't even see my brain. In fact, so you're telling me before we knew anything about neuroscience, we had no idea where thoughts came from? We had nothing. We had no idea about thoughts?
Yeah, that's why you hear people say they do something with their heart. They literally thought things came from the heart.
I highly doubt.
That's a fact. That is a fact.
I don't even want to go there.
It's a fact. I'll send you the link.
Sure.
It's a fact. It's literally a fact.
Whatever. Here's what I'm getting at. how do you know? Let me ask you this way. How do you know you're in pain?
Your brain tells you that.
Your brain tells you you're in pain.
Yeah.
How does that work?
You get a sensation
so
from
you-
your nerve that goes to your brain. Your brain says that's pain.
So now, when you were 5 years old and you scraped your knee and you were in pain, you were aware of neuroscience?
No, I don't have to be.
Okay. Right. So how do you know you're in pain? Because if
Your
you can
brain-
know this at 5,
Your brain
how do
tells
you personally know? At 5 years old, I doubt you were thinking about neuroscience. Or at 3 years old, at 2 years old, when you felt pain, I doubt
feel
you knew
pain.
anything about a brain.
You don't have to know about a brain to know.
Exactly. Right. So how do you know you're in pain?
Your brain tells you.
When you were 2 years old and you were crying, you knew about your brain.
You don't have to know about it. I know about it now. I know the
Exactly.
correct explanation.
Right.
Not
So you
not
don't
knowing
you
about
don't
it
need
doesn't create some sort of question over the fact of the matter.
Right. So that's what I'm getting at. You didn't need to know anything about the brain to know how you know pain. You know pain by just introspecting, by
How do
feeling
you
it,
feel it?
something that you feel. I'd say in your soul. And yeah, there's a correlation with your soul and brain, which I have not denied. And you kind of, for whatever reason,
Highlighted the point because you're saying that there's a correlation between pain and the brain when we know
when
that
did I deny that?
You literally just said it. You
No,
said
I said, when did I ever deny that? I've been saying that the whole time.
You said you
denies
feel it
that?
in. You said you feel it in your soul when we know that it's
Yes.
nerves connected to your brain. We know that's not even debatable. So you attributing it to the soul actually
said, you asked where
highlights the problem.
No. I said I feel it in my soul, and there's correlated with nerves and synapses, because you can have pain without these nerves, and you can have nerves and not feel the pain, even though there's something being elicited, like if you're under anesthesia. So they're not reducible to the other. Are you familiar with reductionism? You're basically saying this is nothing but this, which is essentially what you're trying to do. And I'm going to go back to this. A function of my brain is to have synapses connect, but synapses connecting is not consciousness. So you cannot say that consciousness is just what the brain does, because what the brain does is connects synapses and causes neurons to fire, but that is not consciousness.
And creates thoughts.
Okay, if it's creating thoughts, then it's not the brain. Then you're already conceding my point without realizing it. If it's creating something, in other words, unless you're going to say the brain creates more brain, then consciousness is not the brain or something physical. It's creating something that's not physical.
Have you seen someone think without a brain?
I've never even seen people think at all. I assume they're thinking. That's another one of my points. You have never observed mind. You've only observed brain matter.
You're a hard synopsis.
No,
Wow.
I'm not. Because
you are.
no,
You really are. You're saying that we can't
I'm not a
know
hard
any.
solipsist.
You're saying we can't know
No.
anything.
I
but
didn't say that.
I
didn't say that.
We actually do know that
I didn't say
pain,
that.
for example, comes from nerve endings going to your brain. That's just a fact. What we don't know, what you're trying to explain to me here somehow is that a soul exists. But what you've done is say that you actually feel the pain in your soul for a fact, and maybe the nerves and brain has something to do with it. And
It does for sure.
And you
not maybe.
It's a fact. I agree. So, but you're saying that there's a correlation.
Okay, so here's what I'm saying.
And
I'm holding your feet to the fire. I'm holding your feet to the fire based on your own criteria. You're asking about observing things. I'm telling you, you have never observed a mind. You have only observed, if anything, brain neuron firing and brain functions. You've never observed mind. So you're going against your own criteria, which is special pleading.
I'm not going against my own criteria.
Have you observed a mind?
Every time you create a thought, I've observed your mind.
How did you observe that? What did it look like?
By listening to your thoughts.
So when you listen to a TV or a computer boot up and there's sound, you think you're listening to a mind?
I'm listening to someone's mind. Yeah, those created.
When a computer boots up, when I start my computer,
when I'm
it makes
listening to a TV. Yeah, I'm when I'm listening to a TV show, like I was just watching Better Call Saul. When I'm watching that,
good show.
I'm looking at the results of somebody's mind. They put that show together.
So you're okay. I think you're arguing the illustration, not the principle. Let's go back to the computer. When I boot my computer on, it makes a jingle noise. Are you listening to a mind?
No, I don't think I said that.
Okay, right. Well, that's my point. So just because you hear words, you're not listening to a mind. You assume, and I think rightly so. So I don't want to get away from this point. Have you ever observed a mind? I want a clear answer. Not have you heard sounds come from something that you thought had a mind?
Yes, I've observed a mind by whenever you create.
What did it look like? How do you know I create thoughts? You're begging the question. If thoughts are a state of my mind, then you can't say I've observed the mind by seeing every time you've caused the mind. It's circular reasoning.
It's not circular at all. Because
very much
brains create thoughts.
How do you know? How have you seen a thought? When have you seen it? What did it look like?
Because people unconscious, people without brains don't make thoughts.
You can't point to consciousness. You cannot point to consciousness when I'm asking you how you see consciousness. What does consciousness look like? What mechanism do you use to observe consciousness?
People creating thoughts. That's how you observe
it. You cannot. That's question begging. When I'm asking you, how do you observe consciousness?
It's not question begging at all.
Here's what you're doing, because thoughts are a state of consciousness. So when I ask you, how do you observe consciousness? You're essentially saying by people creating consciousness. That's question begging. How do you observe thoughts?
Ideas. People expressing their ideas is observing the mind. It is.
What does
once you accept that the brain creates thoughts, once you accept that, then you'll understand.
How do you know that? How do you know brain create thoughts?
Because brain dead people don't have thoughts.
How do you know anybody has thoughts? You're begging the question. That's what I don't think you understand.
Your heart, like I said, you're drifting down this path, man.
No,
that's
I'm
not
not.
a good place to
I'm
be.
showing
you are.
I'm showing that your position leads to absurdity.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Let's go on to
my position is that the brain creates thoughts. Your position is that the brain doesn't. It might be correlated, but really there's immaterial thing outside of the body that's actually creating the thoughts. And
so
one is actually demonstrated.
No, my goodness, no.
And one
okay, first of all, I'm fine with saying brain create thoughts, but I also know that the soul can also create thoughts and cause effects in the brain. We can get to that later. My point is, you have never seen
the soul
anything.
Exists.
You have never. You have never. Okay. First, you concede consciousness is not physical. Something needs to possess it. My first argument was whether or not you maintain identity through change. If you do, you need something like a soul, and that's going to be the thing that possesses consciousness. So far, your argument was about the brain, and yet if the brain can be changed, you're not the same person. You haven't conceded that. I was trying to move on. Let me go ahead and go to that other argument I was trying to get to. So, given our two positions, we can say when you use the word I, you're either something physical or immaterial. Now, if you want to be some type of dualist, you're more than welcome to, and I can change the wording if you'd like. But for the sake of just discussion, I'm either purely physical object, meaning physicalism is true, which I would assume you'd hold to some version of physicalism, or I'm an immaterial soul. Now, purely physical objects can be divided in common percentages or degrees. To understand the argument, let me first explain what are called degreed properties and non-degreed properties. So you and I are both persons, so we can say that we both possess the property of personhood. Now, the question is whether or not personhood is a degreed or non-degreed property. A degreed property is something like the property of being loud or hard. These are properties that can fluctuate and change. Something can be louder or softer. Something can be harder or softer. That's a degreed property. By contrast, a non-degreed property is something that cannot fluctuate and change. It's all or nothing. It either is or it isn't. So, for example, the number, take the property of being even. The number 2 and the number 6 are both even. And it makes no sense to say that the number 6 is more even than the number 2, because evenness is a non-degreed property. It either is or isn't. Okay, cool. Now, if you're going to say that you're a body, which is what I heard you say earlier, or if you even say that you're a brain, then what you're going to have to concede is that if, God forbid, something were to be amputated, you would lose percentages of being a person. In other words, let me ask you this. If someone were to chop off my arms and legs, would I be 50% of a person?
I would say no.
Okay, I agree with you. I would have 50% of a body, but I would not be 50% of a person. In fact, men typically have more mass than women, but I know you or I are not going to say that men are more valuable or more persons than women just because we have more mass. In other words, having more mass and matter doesn't mean you matter more. But if you're going to agree with me there, then you can't say that you are identical or reducible to something physical like a brain or a body, because if you're going to go that route, you're going to have to say that being a person is degreed and you can be more or less of a person just by changing the mass and matter that you have. That's an absurd view. If you agree with me that that doesn't make you 50% of a person, though you have 50% of a body, you're going to have to concede that there is more to you than just something physical.
I think there's a reason that you use legs instead of brain. In that example.
Okay, no, we can use brain. So I gave you the rundown slide. In my longer slides, when I give a presentation on this, I use brain. There's something called Dandy-Walker syndrome or anencephalic disease, where there are people who are actually born with 40, 50, 60% of a brain, and the rest of it is just like a cavity with fluid. There are people who've had brain surgery and they've removed part of their brain, so they only have, let's say, 80% of a brain. I think you would agree with me that that doesn't make them 80% persons. Now, they may only have 80% functioning, but that doesn't make them 80% persons. And the same line of logic applies. If you're 100% of a person with less mass and matter, then you are not identical or reducible to a brain and body. You are something more, namely a soul.
What if they remove 100% of the brain? Is that still a person?
Hold on. Well, my argument was, but I don't know if you know why that doesn't apply. My argument is that you're more than a brain and body.
Well, what
that
if
you're something like a soul?
What if they remove 100% of your brain? Are you a person?
Am I a person? So I would say yes, but that's not part of my case that I'm presenting. So in other words, the question would have to be to you. If you remove 20% of a person's brain, are they only 80% persons?
No, I'd say it's still a person. But if they remove 100%,
then you're not identical or reducible to a brain and body.
But if they remove 100%, I would say it's not a person.
Okay, that's fine. Sure. Again, but if you're going to agree with me that they're not 80% persons with 80% brains, you're going to have to give up a physicalist position and welcome to my team. You now have reason to believe the soul exists.
I don't think so at all, because what we're doing here is we're quibbling over the word person and what that means. That doesn't have anything to do with it. It
has everything. Personhood is a property.
It doesn't have anything to do with a soul. That's
so
we're quibbling over what a person, the word person means.
I really want to be respectful here, but at the same time, I don't want to pull any punches here. You've conceded to me you haven't looked into this area or studied this much. This isn't my opinion or me making this stuff up. These are what the scholars are saying. Atheist, Christian, across the board. Either personhood is a degreed property or it's not. This is where the logic leads to. It's not quibbling. But if I'm being honest, that sounds like you're just dodging the point. I didn't say
that it makes someone part of a person. I said if their brain is removed, I said it's not a person.
Okay, no.
But I'm saying,
you're changing the point.
No, I said that it doesn't, that having a part of your brain or part of your body removed doesn't make you 60% of a person. That does not show that there's some sort of immaterial soul inside that person.
It would mean that you would have to be something more than a brain and body. And I just remembered the argument I gave, the syllogism, is called a disjunctive syllogism. That's a valid structure in logic. So if you're going to agree, then you're going to have to follow the conclusion that you're more than a brain and body.
No. Then
you're going to have to say that people are 80% persons.
It doesn't follow.
Those are your two.
Your argument doesn't. That's
That's how logic works.
No,
just because you don't like it doesn't mean you can dismiss it. Okay, which premise do you disagree with?
The first one. To begin with, we said the first one.
Okay, so give me another option. Give me, if you're saying it's false dichotomy, what's your other option?
Humans are half marshmallow. You can be half marshmallow, half
and
person.
Give me an option you agree with, because I'm not trying to cover every single possible.
But that's the
actually,
problem, is that
marshmallows are physical. Marshmallows are physical.
Immaterial.
So nope.
You got me. Immaterial marshmallow.
That's a contradiction in terms.
It's not.
Yeah,
The
marshmallows are
marshmallow-
by definition
It's
physical.
an immaterial
It
marshmallow.
don't matter.
You see,
That's a contradiction in terms.
it's really not. What I'm showing is that
course
I
it
can
is.
just make up anything and then just say that humans are
Well,
we're
sure.
part
And
of
I
that.
can call you out on that when there's a
And
contradiction
you
in terms, which is
can,
what I'm
and
doing.
that's what I'm doing. And I'm waiting.
Where have you
for
called me out? Show me where you called me out, please.
On you saying that there's maybe a correlation between the brain and the mind, but it's
There
really
is a
in the soul.
correlation.
When we're
Yes.
still trying to get
What
the soul.
you
part.
disagreeing with me is not calling me out. You disagreeing with that's expected. That's why we're having the discussion. My point is, if you're gonna deny the soul, these are the implications you're gonna lead to. If you don't like the implications, you just change your position. It's that simple. Follow the logic.
You haven't shown the soul. We're trying to get to the soul. And
Are you familiar with coming to a conclusion based on implications? I mean, that's even how science works. I mean, that's just logic 101. I have one more argument if you want to go
Sure.
to that.
Let's go. to
Okay.
it.
And then we can just kind of wherever you want to go from there. This is one of my favorite. So, actually, I like them all. They're kind of all my favorite. And there's some I haven't even used, but I don't want to go too much at once. So, same first premise. Unless you have another option you're willing to take, I'm happy with that. Second, if I'm a purely physical object, I do not possess free will. I do possess free will. Therefore, I'm not a purely physical object. Therefore, I am a soul. Now, I want to unpack this. I can share it again if you want me to. The way I would define free will is you're the first mover or source of your will or actions. Now, before I go further, let me just go ahead and ask you, since we're just having a discussion here, do you believe that human beings possess free will?
I don't know. Adonis and I have discussed this a lot. I don't know. I don't
Okay.
think there's a way to know if we have free will.
Well, I think there is, but okay. Let me ask you this. And again, this is arguing by implications. I mean, this is philosophy 101. This is logic. Do you think people should be held morally responsible for what they do?
Yes, I think we have to hold people responsible, but that's really to protect society.
Okay. So you would consider yourself an atheist? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Let me ask you this. Why are you an atheist?
I see no evidence for a God.
That's a horrible reason to be an atheist. Hopefully you have evidence for there being no God, but let me ask you this. The beliefs that you hold to, did you come to them on your own intellectual integrity and looking at evidence for yourself?
Well, being an atheist is the answer to one question: do you believe in a God? And for me, that
I don't want to
no.
go. I'd rather
The
not
point
go
is,
into that
the
definition.
point is that has nothing to do with anything else that I believe. But
Okay. Whatever beliefs you hold to,
sure,
do you hold to them for reasons that you would consider rational, that you looked at yourself,
sure,
whatever it is?
sure.
Okay. So you would say that you have this rational responsibility or this intellectual integrity to the beliefs you hold to.
Sure.
Okay. Both of those points, moral responsibility and intellectual integrity, are going to require some sort of libertarian free will. So automatically, if you have those things, then you have free will. If you don't have free will, you can't have either one of those things. I'll just say that and let you go where you want from there.
Sure. I like to believe we have free will, but the way I understand it is we either make our decisions based on reasons or randomly. Right.
So that's a false dichotomy, and it's irrelevant to the question of free will.
Well, it's
because,
not, and I'll explain. I'll educate you on it why. But why is it a false dichotomy first? Maybe we can address that.
Because when we're talking about free will, we're talking about causation. Reasons don't cause. So
They do.
If you don't like false dichotomy, I'll say it's a category fallacy.
No, I mean, it may have been, but they do.
Reasons influence.
Right. Influence.
Okay. Influences are not causes.
So
influences are influences, not causes. Causes are causes. Influences are influences.
So we make our decisions based on reasons or random. What's the other one? What's the other option?
Emotion. Okay. Let me.
Wait. Is emotion
right?
reason?
That's so
okay.
Fair enough. So here's so let's be on the same page. So I'm so glad you stopped me there. Thank you. when you say reason, do you mean rational reason, or do you mean just I can point to something? Because
any reason, it doesn't have to be rational.
okay. So I'm thinking more rationality. So when you talk about reasons, I'm thinking for justifications, because I think people can act on things without any type of good justifications or even maybe justifications. But here, the question of free will is essentially the question of whether or not you're determined or you are the first mover. Put it like this. If to explain my view of free will, to kind of try to get on the same page, let's say someone commits a murder with a gun. Even though the bullet penetrated the heart and killed the person, we don't blame the bullet because we know the bullet didn't act on its own. So we go back one step in this chain of events, and it's the gun that shot it, but we don't blame the gun. We go back one more. We blame the person because we assume that the person was the first mover in the causal chain of events, even though it was a bullet that penetrated the heart. So when it comes to the question of free will, it's essentially a question of what was the first mover in this causal chain of events. If I lift my arm and nothing causes me to do that, I had free will. If you tase me and I lift my arm, then I was caused by something prior to myself. So that would be an example of that false dichotomy. It's not for reasons or randomness. There could be a cause that has neither reason nor is it random. So dominoes falling over is a cause, but it's neither a reason in the sense that I think we're using it, or is it random? So to have free will, you have to be the first mover. If you accept rational responsibility and moral responsibility, you're going to have some type of free will. But if you have some type of free will, you're going to have to be more than a purely physical brain and body. You're going to have something like a soul.
I'll explain why that's incorrect. When I'm saying reasons or random, as I said, it doesn't necessarily have to mean you were using reason or being irrational when you did it. So I can leave out of my house and I have a McDonald's one way or a Burger King the other way. And I don't necessarily know which one I want to go to, but maybe I just go left simply because. Now, I may not have considered why I did that, but something in my brain is saying, go to McDonald's as opposed to go to Burger King. Now,
so let's just call it a category fallacy, because again, the question of free will is whether or not you were caused by something external or prior to yourself.
Again, and that's the point. Now, what may have done it was maybe I want a bacon cheeseburger and McDonald's doesn't have bacon cheeseburgers. So maybe I go to Burger King, and that's a reason that I go to Burger King.
Are you familiar with determinism?
Yes.
Can you explain your understanding of that, just so see if we're on the same page?
Where you don't really decide, just the everything together kind of influences your brain to make whatever decision it makes.
So no, not exactly. It's just that there are some prior conditions that necessitate or cause what comes after. So a compatibilist would still have reasons, if you will, but it's still a type of determinism. So when we're talking about free will, we're talking about determinism or indeterminism, or what is it that causes a person's will. Right. That's what we're talking about.
So what I'm saying is that those reasons are why we do whatever we do. The only way to know whether or not you could have done differently, which would be the free will part, is if you could rewind time and have everything be exactly the same and then choose something else. That's the only way.
That's a view of free will that I reject. It's a popular view, but it's one I reject. It's not
the correct
core
one.
of free will. It's not. How much of free will have you studied and looked into?
Enough.
What authors? What books?
Enough.
What scholars?
You're not gonna use the arguments from authority. That's just
it's not. Well, first of all,
we either do it for reasons or we don't, and the only way to see if we could have done something different is to rewind time. There's no way around. No. There's no way around that.
No,
there is no way around that.
Give me a philosopher that says that.
I know you don't.
Tell me a scholar that says that. Tell me a scholar that says that.
Is there a way around it? What is it?
Yes, because first of all, I reject the standard of dual ability is what essentially.
You can either go by the reasons or random. Those are the two options.
Can you be determined and still have reasons?
The determination is by the reasons.
Now,
It doesn't matter what the reasons are.
By reasons, do you mean causes? And I wasn't trying to pull a appeal to authority, because not all appeal authorities are fallacious. There are many appeals to authority that are perfectly valid. So that's another objection I hear, which is misused so much. Just because someone claims an authority or appeals to an authority doesn't mean it's fallacious. You can have adequate appeals to authority. It's only an appeal to authority fallacy if it's the wrong authority in the wrong category or the wrong field. But going back, when you say reasons, do you mean causes?
You still have to go to the argument. The appeal to authority is a fallacy.
When you say reasons, do you mean okay? When you say reasons, do you mean causes?
I mean reasons. We do things either for reasons or random. You agree that we don't do things randomly, correct?
I'm okay with saying some things could be done randomly. I don't know. That's why the question of free will is essentially whether or not you're the first mover of your will.
So you think we do things randomly? I mean, that's
I
fine
already
if you
answered
do.
that.
Okay, you
I
did.
already answered that. I said I'm open to it.
So that's still not free will. That's random.
I think most.
So you're still wrong. Either way, you're wrong on that point.
Okay, so
Because random is not free will.
I don't think. I don't think you're understanding you're not listening to everything I said. I said I'm open to some things being random. I don't know if there are, but the question of free will is whether or not you're the first mover. I can have reasons. There can be a reason. Okay, a reason. I can be determined by a reason, but that doesn't tell me whether or not I'm free.
Correct.
In other words, that's why it's a category fallacy. It does not answer the question of free will.
How would you determine whether or not you're free?
So now you're asking an epistemic question. I'm focusing on the ontological conditions for whether or not free will can exist.
Epistemology is so much better and so much more important. But
first of all, to even have epistemology, there needs to be an ontology.
How would you know whether or not your will is free?
We're not talking about knowledge. We're talking about, first of all, what are the conditions needed
for there to even
be free will?
And that's why I said I don't know if we have free will, because the only way to know that is to be in the exact same situation.
Let me say this.
Let me say something different.
Let's suppose you and I are scientists and we're looking at some planet that we can't find. And we want to know, is there water on this planet? Before we start even looking, we have to at least know what would be the requirements for water to exist on this planet. All I'm doing is not saying, can we know? I'm saying, what are the criteria for us to even have the possibility of free will? Much like what's the criteria for water to even exist on a certain planet? You don't even have to know about the planet yet. You can establish criteria. That's ontology is what I'm getting at. All I'm asking is, ontologically speaking, criteria for free will is first that you're a first mover. And if my argument is, if you're just a purely physical object, then you're causally determined by prior events and conditions beyond your control, and you can't have free will if you're purely physical. Are you familiar with the law of causal closure?
No.
So if there's no God and the universe is a closed system, the law of causal closure would be true. And that is essentially the view that every physical event must have a prior physical cause. So if everything's physical and there is no God and the law of causal closure applies, then here's what Aristotle said. Let me try it this way. Aristotle said, if I move a rock with my staff, my hand moves a staff, my staff moves a rock, my hand moves a staff, but what moves me? So in order to have free will, you have to be the first mover. So what would your answer be to Aristotle's question? What? If you're going to have free will, you're going to have to be the first mover.
Why did he move?
Right. Why did the hand move? What would you say?
I'm not inside his brain. I don't know.
Physically speaking, why did the hand move?
Maybe he was trying to move the rock.
If you were to just look at his body, not ask him, what would you see?
I would see his hand move.
What caused the hand to move?
I would say him.
You've been saying it.
Yeah, I would say him, but I don't know what caused him to want to move that rock. And that thing that's causing the movement is what I'm talking about.
Okay, so you've been saying it. You've been saying this all day, and you missed it. A brain firing, right? Neurons firing caused the hand to move. If you were to have X-ray vision and you saw his hand move, you would see that being caused by brain firings, right?
Yeah, but there's something that causes the brain firing.
Okay, we're not there yet. Are we on the same page? A group of neurons firing caused a hand to move. Okay,
sure.
Now the next question is, what caused those neurons to fire? We're not talking about the person's mind. We're just looking at the physics. you have two options at this point. If the law of causal closure is true, well, let me just ask you, what would be needed to cause that neuron firing physically? Because we're talking about law of causal closure, we're looking at the physical.
It could be any number of stimulus.
Sure. Now, you have two options. You can say another brain firing, but then you're just pushing back the goalposts. You have to say another brain firing and another brain firing. So that first option won't work because it leads into an infinite regress. Your second option is that at some point, you're going to have to point at something external and prior to the person that caused the brain firing, that caused a hand, that caused a stab, that caused a rock. However, which is the only option you have, if that's the case, you're not going to be the first mover, and thus you're not going to have free will.
And I don't agree that with what you're saying that it would cause an infinite regress. We don't know. It could be a number of things that occurred before.
Logic tells us a lot, and infinite regresses are not possible.
I don't think that's been proven.
Can there be a triangle made with 4 points instead of 3?
If there's a God.
No, gosh, you need to stop talking to those Christians you were mentioning. No, if they tell you that, run away from them. No, that's called a logical contradiction. It's a logical impossibility. So let me ask again: can a triangle be created with 4 points instead of 3?
But they said that he created logic.
So stop talking to them. Can a triangle be created with 4 points instead of 3?
If there's a God, yes.
Okay, let's say there's no God. Can a triangle be created with 4 points instead of 3?
No, not by definition. Triangle has
Right.
3.
So you don't need to prove its logic, right? It's a contradiction. Infinite regresses cannot happen. Regardless, your other option is going to...
That hasn't been proven, though. That's the point. That's not...
How would you even prove that?
That's not my problem. That's your problem.
That's very dismissive.
You have to show it. Like you can't say something is impossible.
Okay.
You can't...
Okay. Show me that I have to...
You can't say something is impossible and then not want to have to show how. You'd have to say that.
Okay. It's also because, so I'm not sure how familiar you are with philosophy, but this is something virtually accepted across the board again. In other words, these are elementary things in philosophy that I don't think I'd have to show. We can walk through something.
I've actually seen this argued, so I know you're wrong on that.
So because someone disagrees with me, you know,
the infinite regress. I know you're wrong on that. I've seen it argued. How can virtually everyone be in agreement with that if I've seen it?
No, virtually everyone's in agreement with me. There's a very few minority of people who might even say that it, and then you have to make a distinction between an actual infinite and a potential infinite. There's a difference. An actual infinite cannot exist.
And you just, I want to say, randomly, or not even randomly, just threw it out there that it would be an infinite regress and didn't show that it would be.
Because it's pretty basic, but I guess we can walk through it if you want. If a neuron, in other words, you cannot have neurons firing infinitely into the past in order to make something happen.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, how many numbers would it take for you to?
Here's the thing. You wanted to stop that chain of events at the hand, or even at the neuron firing the first time.
No, I don't want to stop it anywhere. I'm asking. I'm honestly asking, where would it stop? Is what I'm asking.
It could stop. I don't know in this hypothetical, but the point is,
in general, we can know that it had to start somewhere. Correct.
I don't know. I wouldn't say that because I don't know.
You don't think
I don't know.
Things
I don't
have
know
to
how
start?
the butterfly effect thing works out.
That has
somewhere.
nothing to do with
It does because what it does because what you're saying is that there's some action that caused him to fire to make his hand move, and there could have been something that caused that fire and something that caused that. I don't know where that ends. It may be infinite. It may not.
I'm not okay. Based on the law of causal closure, every physical event must have a prior physical cause. In order for this domino to fall, one before it has to fall. It can't keep going backwards, or else it will never start. It will never come to this point. Let me ask it this way: how many numbers would it take for you to count to infinity?
Infinite.
And how many numbers would that be?
Any number.
Any number would get you to infinity.
I mean, infinity is not a number. There is no end to infinity
Right.
the way we understand it.
Right. So can you count past infinity?
No.
Well, there you go. If you can't count to past infinity, you cannot count down from infinity. Hence, an actual infinite regress can't be possible. There you go.
That doesn't show that.
Oh, wow.
That doesn't show that at all. But that's not even relevant to what we were discussing.
It is relevant because you're the one that said, how can it not be an infinite regress? You just proved it yourself. So the other option is something prior and external to the person causing their own to fire. They weren't the first mover, therefore they can't have free will.
So because you can't count it, it's impossible in actuality?
Well, that would be an actuality. If you can count to it, it would be actual, right?
No, counting, no. Are you saying numbers are real?
No.
Okay. Well, no. Again, we were talking about the Aristotle hand pushing the rock. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And I'm saying
what I'm saying is that yes, it was his brain firing that caused his hand to do that. But I'm saying his brain fired because of whatever stimulus.
Mm-hmm.
You would agree?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, my point is that we don't know whether or not whatever stimulus it was that caused that, we don't know whether or not he could have chosen some other option.
That's
not
that's
and
okay. We're not all we're asking right now is what caused it. We're not talking about options.
Well,
if you're going to concede
talking about free will is what we're talking about. So
being the first mover.
So for me, the free will is, could he have done something different? And what I'm saying is that we don't know whether he could have done something different without a time machine. Thus, I don't know if I believe in free will because I can't go back in time to make all the conditions exactly the same and then have him choose something different, which is problematic for your free will or soul.
Are you familiar with necessary and sufficient conditions? Are you familiar with that notion?
Describe it.
So, a sufficient condition for my grass being wet is turn on the sprinklers, right? That's a sufficient condition, but it's not a necessary condition because it could rain and my grass would be wet. Okay. So necessary and sufficient conditions are something that a sufficient condition is if you have this, then you've got what you need to get, let's say, A. A necessary condition is something that you have to have this in order to have A. And if you don't have this, you can't have A.
Right.
What I'm saying is I'm cutting past the dual ability, which is what you're trying to argue. And I'm saying being the first mover is not only sufficient, but a necessary condition for free will. If you don't have that necessary condition, you can't have free will, full stop, no more further investigations needed. That's why I'm focusing on that. That's a necessary condition for free will. Given the example, if you're not the first mover, you can't have free will. So it's irrelevant about time machines. It's irrelevant about whether he can do something different when we're talking about a necessary condition for free will.
And I'm not sure if that's true, but the point I'm saying is what I was saying is that I don't know if I agree that there is free will either way.
Right. And that's fine. My only point is, my only point so far.
But you were tying free will to existence of a soul. And
yes,
that's why that's going to be problematic.
Explain why a little bit, because I didn't understand that. But my only point so far is that if there's no soul, you're not going to have free will.
I don't see how
that's my only part
tied into
so
that.
Far.
But my point was that if the condition of this argument requires there to be free will, then it's already not going to work here because I don't know one way or the other. I don't even, I don't follow one way or the other.
And this is not my first rodeo. That's why there's more to unpack, because all I'm trying to establish is that if there's no soul and it's just physical, and given the law of causal closure, that every physical event requires necessarily a prior physical cause, then you can't have free will because you can't be the first mover, which is a necessary condition for free will. That being said, here's where we go from here. If you think people should be held morally responsible, and if you think you have intellectual integrity to the beliefs you hold, you're going to have free will. Otherwise, you're just determined. And a magnet's attracted to metal, and pedophiles are attracted to children, and they're both caused. And you can't really hold them responsible for what they do if they're just being caused, much like we don't hold the gun or bullet responsible. So if you're gonna say we need to hold people responsible, and if you're gonna take intellectual credit for being an atheist, you're gonna have to have free will. If you don't have free will, you can't have either of those two.
And that's why when you asked initially that question about whether or not we hold them responsible, it kind of depends on what you mean by that. So what I said was that you do for the safety of society. So I think you do lock up a murderer, whether or not they had free will, because they've shown the propensity to cause harm to society. So I don't think that
for the sake of time, let's drop that one, because that's a whole other thing we can unpack. Let's just focus on the intellectual integrity. Do you believe that you freely came to hold the position that you do and not believe in God?
It was caused by reasons.
So were you free or not?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
The reasons convinced me.
Okay, so you were convinced. That assumes some type of free will. In other words, do you think you're more rational than some people? Do you have an intellectual or a rational responsibility to your beliefs? Do you think some people are not being rationally responsible when they say give dumb arguments for God?
I don't think that proves the free will, because I don't know that I could have done otherwise.
One question at a time. If you hold intellectual integrity to your beliefs, if you feel that you were not brainwashed or whatever the case is, however you want to classify any other Christians, to believe what you do, then you're going to have to assume some type of rational responsibility and free will to what you believe. To have knowledge, you're going to have free will, because you're going to need to be able to provide justifications to your beliefs. In order to know any of your beliefs are true, you're going to have to be free and not determined. For us to even have this discussion, and for there to be the possibility of coming to a conclusion based on the evidence, we need to assume some type of free will. Otherwise, we're just determined to believe what we do, and there's no point in arguing about whether or not there's free will if you don't have the freedom to change your mind.
Well, no, the change of the mind would come with, perhaps I give you that reason that changes the mind, but I don't know whether or not you could have done otherwise. And that's why I had to go back to the time machine.
And we're going to go back to the first mover thing. If you're not the first mover, every other question is not even necessary. Right there, full stop, no free will. So if I'm caused to believe what I do, then all my beliefs cannot be rational by definition, because I didn't come to them on the basis of rationality. I came to them on the basis of dominoes falling, so to speak, to oversimplify it.
I mean, that's fine if you want to believe that. Like I said, I don't. I'm in the middle. I don't know.
Well, that's where the logic points to. You can follow the logic, or you can just, I don't know.
So you asked earlier, you said, when I have this discussion, do I think that other people that have a different belief than me are being rational in their belief? I think you kind of alluded to that.
Something like that. And
right. That wasn't the words that you said, but it was something. Like
sure,
that,
yeah.
right?
That's fine.
And my answer is, I don't know. Like I consciously think about that. It may be that they cannot, or maybe I haven't given whatever bit of information that would change their brain chemistry to have it change. But I don't know. And it is something that I definitely consider when I'm speaking to people. So no, I free will part, that's going to be a tough argument to make here. Simply because I don't know. I'm not saying we do or don't.
And that's why rather than going on free will, I'm just asking, do you think that you're rational in your beliefs? Do you think you should have rationality behind your beliefs?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, then you'll need some kind of free will to not be. Otherwise, you're just irrational at best. You're just being caused by dominoes falling. And you can't even verify whether or not your beliefs are true, because if all your beliefs are determined, then your very belief that your beliefs are true is equally something you're determined to believe, and you can never verify it, which means you can't have knowledge because that's a requirement for knowledge, is to have a justified true belief.
You can. There's evidence and things of
And
such.
what would you use to investigate the evidence?
Science.
Right. And what processes would you use? In other words, let me put it this way. If there's no soul and there's no God, then everything you believe is going to be determined. Let's just say there's no soul, everything you believe is determined. And whenever you use science and investigate your beliefs, well, guess what? Your belief that you come to about your beliefs was still determined, and you're back to the same problem. So you can never verify it, which means also you can never have knowledge.
I disagree. DNA, for example. You watch Maury Povich?
You're gonna beg the question. I'll just say that. Whatever answer you give, you're gonna beg the question if there's no free will. Because let me try it this way, then I'll let you push back. Let's go to is it Adonis? Is that right? Okay. I want to make sure I pronounce that right. Let's say you and I could control his brain and make him believe whatever we wanted to. And we made him believe it was going to rain today. And then we're behind the desk with our computers, controlling his thoughts and his brain. And someone says, "Why do you think it's going to rain today?" And we're like, let's type something in, and let's say because he let's make him believe he's a scientist who can study the weather. And then every reason that he gives for his beliefs come from us. I wouldn't consider that rational. And then someone says, "Well, go test your beliefs." And then we laugh and we say, "Okay, now we're going to make him believe that the tests he conducts are going to prove his beliefs true." And we high five each other and type it in. Everything he believes is determined by us, and his beliefs about his beliefs are determined by us. Which means if he's determined, it's not science. This is philosophy and free will. If all his beliefs are determined and his beliefs about his beliefs are determined, then whatever you say is going to be circular and question begging, because there's going to be no way for him to objectively verify the truth of his beliefs.
That's right? Okay. That's why I specifically said science.
Let's stick to this illustration. Let's make him think he's doing science, and he boils an egg on his head. And we make him think that's good science. And he says, "No, look, the science proved it." Well, why does he believe the science proved it? Because we made him think that was good science. And we made him think that good science is what proved his beliefs true. You're just pushing back the goalposts. There's no way of escaping this.
There's plenty of ways to escape it. Science.
I don't think you understood the. Okay.
Well, no, I understood it, but the problem that you're going to have, the problem is that you don't understand that when you're doing the science, other people duplicate that same science. So
right, and if their beliefs are determined,
you can type in the things into my brain, but then I run it past the other people that are also doing the thing. And if they're all coming up with 2, and I'm coming up with 1, then there's a problem. And
there is a problem. So here's what I would do.
It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm wrong, but it's likely.
Right. But if everybody's determined, here's what I would do. I would just type in your brain, "Hey, they're wrong. Hey, just tell them you disagree. Hey, just call it a false dichotomy, and you're justifying your beliefs."
I don't think so.
And then, I don't think so.
No. I think it's been about 2 hours, but I disagree.
That's not a rebuttal, but hey, it's been a fun 2 hours. I really appreciate the discussion.
All right, me too. And
you mind if
I think I do understand your position.
Thank you.
What I would say is you're gonna have to, if you're trying to move people that don't believe in a soul, you can't use the brain mind stuff, because you haven't connected the soul to the mind yet. And I'm going to need that if you want to convince me that this thing exists. And saying that there's correlations between things that we know is cause and effect with the brain, pain from feeling things from your nerve endings to your brain, calling that a correlation is not going to go over well with people that acknowledge that the brain is where that sensations come from and things like that.
So you remember the three atheist scholars I quoted in the beginning? They would very largely disagree with just about everything you just said there.
They're wrong. if they don't
So
think that,
academic scholars who've been studying this for a majority of their life are wrong.
Yes.
But
if they don't,
you who have admittedly not studied much to this, you're right.
Yes. If they don't think that pain is in the brain, then they're wrong. Period. They're wrong. And
maybe there is no free will, because
no way around that.
If I didn't know any better, I'd say someone's typing that for you to say that, because there's plenty of scholars who are not Christian, who are atheists, who would strongly disagree with what you said.
What would the scientists say?
Okay, so depends on which one you ask, because first, you might as well ask me what a plumber would say. These are philosophical questions, not scientific questions. And even the atheist scientists would also agree with that, who understand the philosophy. But that'd be a whole nother can of worms that we'd go into. But like you said, I enjoyed the discussion. I was going to ask, if you don't mind, before we hang up, if I could pray for us.
Sure.
I appreciate that. Father, I just thank you for this time that you've given us. I thank you very much for Will. I thank you for his willingness to have this discussion, to be open, to listen, to even push back. I pray that in all this you be glorified. I thank you for my brother Adonis, that you would just continue to bless him. Thank you for using him in this. And I pray that you would, that your spirit would just speak to Will as well, that you would, Lord, bless his life, be with him, speak to him, Lord. That you would encourage him to keep seeking, to keep asking questions, Father, and that you would meet him where he's at, and that you would help him and point him to the right places to find the answers he's looking for. Again, just thank you for this time and for us being able to have this discussion. And we pray this in your name and thank you for it. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, did he leave?
I don't see him anymore. Oh,
he got raptured. Look at that.
Oh, I guess he said, yeah, you can pray, but I'm not going to be around for that. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So, well, hey, thank you very much for being willing to use your time for this discussion.